9 years after my parents cut me out of the family for marrying my wife, they showed up at my door crying, because the son they always chose over me had just destroyed everything. When I opened that door and saw them standing there, I didn't feel anger first. I felt confusion. Because after someone ignores you for nearly a decade, your brain stops expecting them to ever come back. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm Michael Brown, and I grew up in Colorado, about 20 minutes outside Fort Collins. If you asked my parents when I was growing up, they'd say I was the difficult child. Not the kind of difficult that gets arrested or causes big problems. I just didn't follow the plan they had for me. My oldest brother David Brown followed that plan perfectly. Straight A's, varsity sports, scholarships, business degree, a job in finance right after college. David was the kind of son parents brag about at dinner parties. My parents talked about him like he was proof they'd done everything right. Then, there was my middle brother Mark Brown. Mark was quieter. He stayed out of arguments and never challenged anyone. He became a physical therapist and moved to Boise, Idaho after college. Mark kept his distance from most family drama. And then, there was me. I didn't go to college. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to. I started working landscaping jobs right after high school. Cutting grass, planting trees, building stone walkways. It was hard work, but I liked it. Being outside all day felt better than sitting in classrooms. My parents hated that decision. They never said it outright, but every conversation about my future ended the same way. "You're still figuring things out." That was their polite way of saying they thought I was wasting my life. For a few years, I just kept my head down and worked. Eventually, I started picking up my own clients. Then a few more. Then enough that I registered a small business. It wasn't glamorous. Most days, I was covered in dirt and sweat. But it was mine. Things stayed tense with my parents, but manageable. Until I met Emma Taylor. I met Emma at a small coffee shop in Fort Collins. It wasn't some movie moment. I'd stopped in after finishing a landscaping job nearby, still dusty and exhausted. She was working behind the counter. She handed me my coffee and noticed the company logo on my shirt. "You the owner of that landscaping company?" she asked. I laughed. "Owner is a generous word. Right now it's mostly just me and a truck." She smiled and said, "Still counts." I kept coming back to that coffee shop after that. Partly for the coffee. Mostly for Emma. Over the next few weeks we talked more and more. Eventually I asked her out. Emma's life hadn't been easy. Her parents struggled with addiction for most of her childhood. By the time she was 16, she was already working multiple jobs just to stay afloat. She was tougher than almost anyone I'd ever met. Not loud or aggressive. Just steady. Calm. The kind of person who doesn't panic when life gets messy. We started dating seriously after a couple months. And pretty quickly I realized something. Emma believed in me in a way nobody else ever had. When I talked about growing my business, she didn't laugh. She didn't question it. She started asking questions. "How many clients do you have? Do you track your expenses? Do you have a contract template?" It turned out she was great with numbers. Within a few months, she'd helped me organize my entire business. Budgets, invoices, scheduling. Things I'd been improvising suddenly became structured. That first year with Emma, my company grew faster than it ever had before. I knew pretty early on that I wanted to marry her. The problem was my parents. The first time they met Emma was at their house in Loveland. Dinner started normally enough. But I could feel the tension almost immediately. My mom, Donna Brown, kept asking Emma questions that sounded polite but felt like interviews. "What do your parents do? Where did you go to college? Where are you working now?" Emma answered honestly. She didn't try to hide her background. She explained that she hadn't been able to afford college and had been supporting herself for years. My dad, Robert Brown, barely spoke the entire meal. He just watched. When dinner ended and Emma stepped outside to take a phone call, my mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. She lowered her voice. "Michael, she seems like the kind of girl who might hold you back." I remember staring at her. "What does that even mean?" "She's had a difficult life," my mom said carefully. "Sometimes people bring their problems into relationships." I felt my chest tighten. "You don't even know her." My dad joined the conversation then. He crossed his arms and said something that stuck with me for years. "Son, you need to think long term. This relationship might not be the right move for you." That was the first time I realized my parents had already decided who Emma was, and nothing she did was going to change their minds. At the time, I thought maybe things would get better. Families argue. Parents worry. I figured eventually they'd see how good Emma was for me. I was wrong. And that realization would change everything that happened next. Looking back now, I think my parents decided they didn't like Emma before they ever gave her a chance. After that first dinner in Loveland, everything she did was judged through that lens. If she spoke too much, my mom said she was pushy. If she stayed quiet, my dad said she seemed cold. There was no winning. Emma noticed it too, of course. She wasn't stupid. One night a few weeks later we were sitting on the couch in my small apartment in Fort Collins, eating takeout after a long day. She looked over at me and said, carefully, "Your parents don't like me very much." I sighed. "They're just protective." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Protective of you, or protective of their idea of you?" That question stuck with me, because deep down I knew the answer. My parents had a version of my life they wanted. College degree, corporate job, wife from the right kind of background. Emma didn't fit that picture. But I loved her. And she loved me. So we kept moving forward. Over the next 2 years my landscaping business grew slowly but steadily. Emma helped with the finances in the evenings after work. She built spreadsheets, tracked invoices, helped me bid on bigger jobs. Before long I hired my first full-time employee, a guy named Eric Moore. Eric had worked construction for years and knew landscaping better than I did. Between the two of us, we started landing commercial contracts. Small office parks, apartment complexes. Nothing huge yet, but enough to make the business stable. Emma was a big part of that. Without her, I probably would have kept running things like a chaotic side hustle. She turned it into something real. And that made my parents dislike her even more. Because the more stable my life became, the harder it was for them to pretend she was ruining it. My brother David, meanwhile, was thriving in their eyes. He'd moved to Scottsdale, Arizona, and started working as a financial advisor. Nice condo, nice car, expensive suits. Every time my parents talked about him, they sounded proud. "David just helped a client invest $500,000. David's firm is expanding. David's doing very well." It became a running theme at family gatherings. David was success. I was still figuring things out. Emma came with me to a few of those gatherings early in our relationship. After the third one, she stopped volunteering to go. Not because she complained. Emma rarely complained about anything. But I could see the way my mom looked at her. Like she was temporary. Like she didn't belong there. Then, about 3 years into our relationship, I proposed. It wasn't elaborate. Just the two of us hiking in the foothills outside Fort Collins. We'd reached a quiet overlook with a view of the valley. I pulled a ring out of my pocket. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. Emma laughed when she saw me fumbling with the box. "What are you doing?" I took a breath. "Trying to ask you to marry me without embarrassing myself." She smiled. Too late. But when I actually asked the question, her eyes filled with tears. And she said yes. For a few weeks after that, everything felt perfect. Until we told my parents. We drove to Loveland one Sunday afternoon to share the news in person. I remember Emma squeezing my hand in the car before we walked inside. "No matter what happens," she said quietly, "I'm glad we found each other." At the time, I thought she was just nervous. I didn't realize she was preparing for the worst. My mom's reaction was immediate. She started crying. Not emotional, happy crying. The kind of crying people do when they're disappointed. "I just think this is happening too fast," she said. 3 years isn't fast," I replied. My dad leaned back in his chair and stared at the table. Finally he said, "Son, you're making a mistake." Emma stayed calm the whole time. She didn't argue. Didn't raise her voice. She just listened. Eventually she said something simple. "I love your son. I'm not trying to take him away from you." My mom shook her head. "That's not the issue." But she never explained what the issue actually was. After that conversation, things deteriorated quickly. Phone calls from my parents became lectures. "You're rushing into this. You don't know her well enough. Marriage is a huge commitment." Every conversation felt like they were trying to talk me out of it. David joined the chorus too. During one call he told me, "You're thinking with your emotions instead of your future." I remember laughing. "You met your wife in college and married her a year later. "That's different," he said. I never got a clear explanation for why it was different. Eventually, Emma looked at me one evening while we were working on invoices together and asked the question neither of us wanted to face. "Do you think they're going to come to the wedding?" I hesitated. "I hope so." But the truth was already becoming obvious. The invitation deadline came and went. No RSVP. No phone call. Nothing. A week later, my dad finally called. His voice sounded stiff. "We won't be attending." That was it. No long explanation. Just a statement. My mom didn't call at all. When I hung up the phone, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Emma eventually walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I didn't know how to process it. Parents missing your wedding isn't something you ever really imagine happening. But the wedding went ahead anyway. It was held at a small reception hall in Fort Collins. Emma's friends filled most of the room. A few of my cousins came quietly, including my cousin Kevin Davis. But the seats where my parents should have been stayed empty. I tried not to look at them during the ceremony. But I noticed them anyway. 2 empty chairs in the front row. And that was the moment I realized something. My parents weren't just unhappy about my marriage. They were willing to erase me from their lives because of it. What I didn't know at the time was how long that silence would last. Or how things would eventually come back around. After the wedding, the silence from my parents didn't fade. It hardened. At first, I expected things to cool off eventually. A few months, maybe a year. Families fight, people calm down, someone makes the first call. But that call never came. No birthday messages. No holiday invitations. No casual check-ins. Nothing. It was like I had been quietly erased from their lives. The strange thing was how quickly life moved forward anyway. Emma and I settled into our routine in Fort Collins. Work during the day. Paperwork and planning at night. Slowly, the landscaping company started growing. Our employee Eric Moore became my crew supervisor, and together we started landing bigger contracts around the city. Apartment complexes. Office parks. A few small commercial properties. Nothing flashy, but steady work. Emma handled most of the financial side of things. Budgets. Invoices. Taxes. If I'm being honest, she turned the business from something messy into something stable. Within 5 years, we had multiple crews working around northern Colorado. And eventually we bought a house. Not a huge one. Just a modest place in a quiet neighborhood outside Fort Collins. But it was ours. For the first time in my life, things felt calm. The absence of my parents hurt less with time. It didn't disappear completely. But life got full enough that the empty space stopped dominating everything. Occasionally I'd hear updates about my family through relatives. Mostly through my Aunt Linda Johnson. She never took sides. She'd just pass along little pieces of information. David was doing extremely well financially. My parents had helped him with investments. They were proud of how successful he'd become. Mark still lived in Boise, staying out of most family drama. From everything I heard, my parents spent a lot of time visiting David in Scottsdale. Vacations. Family holidays. The kind of gatherings I used to attend. I tried not to dwell on it. Life was good where I was. Emma and I built something solid together. Then, about 9 years after the wedding, something happened that I never expected. One evening, I came home after finishing a long landscaping job on the edge of town. It was late. The sun had already set. Emma was in the kitchen making dinner. Normal night. Normal life. Then, there was a knock at the door. Not a quick tap. A heavy, uncertain knock. I remember glancing at Emma. "Expecting anyone?" She shook her head. I walked over and opened the door. And for a moment my brain didn't process what I was seeing. My parents were standing on the porch. Robert Brown and Donna Brown. 9 years older. 9 years quieter. My mom looked smaller somehow. My dad looked tired. And my mom was crying. Not the controlled crying she used when she wanted sympathy. This was messy. Her eyes were red. Her hands were shaking. She looked at me like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to speak. Then she said my name. "Michael." It sounded strange coming from her after so many years. "Can we come in?" Behind me I heard Emma step into the hallway. She froze when she saw them. Nobody moved for a few seconds. Then my dad cleared his throat. "Son, we need to talk." I stepped aside and let them enter. They walked slowly into the house, like they were afraid they didn't belong there. which, honestly, they didn't anymore. We sat down at the kitchen table. The same table Emma and I used every night for dinner. My parents looked around the room quietly, taking in the house, the furniture, the framed photos on the walls. Finally, my dad spoke. "You've done well for yourself." For some reason, that comment almost made me laugh. For years, they treated me like the failure. Now they were sitting inside the life I'd built without them. My mom wiped her eyes and started talking. At first, it came out in pieces, broken sentences. But eventually, the story became clear. For the past several years, my parents had trusted David to handle their finances, investments, retirement accounts, planning. After all, he was the financial expert in the family. That's what they told everyone. Turns out he'd been quietly draining those accounts. Bad investments, high-risk trades, gambling, loans they didn't know about. By the time they realized what was happening, most of their retirement savings were gone. And David had disappeared. He left Scottsdale suddenly, stopped answering calls, closed accounts, vanished. My mom kept repeating the same sentence. "We didn't know what else to do. We didn't know where else to go." I sat there listening, while my brain replayed every memory I'd spent years trying to bury. My wedding, the empty chairs, the silence afterward, the way they'd cut me out like I didn't exist. And now they were sitting in my kitchen asking for help. Emma didn't say much during the conversation. She just sat beside me quietly, calm, watching everything. Eventually, my dad asked the question they'd come here to ask. "Would it be possible for us to stay here for a little while?" The room went completely silent. Emma looked at me. She didn't speak, but her expression said everything. This decision was mine. For the first time in my life, the balance of power between my parents and me had completely flipped. Part of me still wanted to help them. That instinct never really disappears. But another part of me remembered the years they'd chosen someone else over me. The years they'd pretended I didn't exist. Finally, I spoke. "I need time to think." They're staying in a small motel outside Fort Collins right now. I haven't given them an answer. And the strange thing is, I don't feel angry anymore. Just tired. Because the people who once had complete control over my life are suddenly asking for mercy. And I still don't know if I should give it to them. But one thing keeps echoing in my head. All those years my parents believed my brother was the successful one, and I was the mistake. Turns out the life they trusted collapsed. And the one they abandoned is the only thing they have left. I just haven't decided yet if that means they deserve a place in it again.